At this point, I'm going to get help from our guests, who I have only been warming up but not introduced. Welcome, Albie Amankona. How are you?
I'm very well, Nick. How are you?
I'm very well. Did you get this?
I didn't quite get it. Can you explain it a little bit?
Well, It's Raining Men, Hallelujah is a song, right?
Of course.
Is that right? I'm looking for help, guys. Okay. Yeah, the Weather Girls, apparently.
I know the song, but I'm confused about the story, Nick.
Well, this is. You're not a football fan, are you?
No, I'm not.
You are going to come over as a real Tory if you carry on like this. You know, it's a Raining Men, Hallelujah. We have been drawn against Iran in the World Cup.
Should Iran be playing in the World Cup?
Well, should any of us be playing in the World Cup? I think boycott. You've got to ask yourself, why were these people in Qatar selected? We know 6,000 people have died. Now, admittedly, that's not all accidents or horrors. We know it's a country that has appalling human rights. Why are we going?
Precisely, and I think it should be food for thought for some of these football players who actually have been backing some very worthwhile causes.
All right.
And whether or not they want to go to a country where they don't really have very good human rights. It doesn't really make sense when you see these people like Marcus Rashford going to play in Qatar and criticising the government for not treating people well here, in his opinion.
Oh, well said, Albie. Now, we'll be getting a full World Cup update at 7:45 from Tom Clayton from Talk Sport. God, it is early. Give me a break, everyone. Dear. Now, Daily Express, picking up on a few here. Andrew wants to be at Queen's side for Jubilee. No surprise there. The Guardian, well, it's too thick to tear up, so I won't be emulating Mike Graham there, but it does say COVID hits all-time high in UK as Easter holiday begins. Desperately seeking the opportunity there to wind us all up and get us all scared with the high figures. So I think we'll just park that. Don't think there's anything more to say on that. Daily Mail. Now, this is going to run a bit, I think. Now, Prince Andrew obviously just doshed out 12 million. We don't think it's all his own money to his mother. To his mother. We think some of it may have come from his mother. We think. I'd have no idea. And now it looks like he's taken 750 grand from an alleged fraudster. Alleged, I hasten to add. And when the banks, because a large chunk of money was placed in his account, the banks have to ring up and do due diligence, say, oh, what's this money for? And you know, we have to ask these questions. And there's a slightly conflicting story. Apparently it's either to pay for one of his weddings, what a wedding, right? Or it's a gift, and I think it was to Princess Beatrice or Eugenie, one of them. And the stories are conflicting. And there it is. Now, you look very young, Albie. I mean, honestly, I'm not going to ask you your age, but people who are my age will remember Sarah Ferguson, when she married Prince Andrew, money was always an issue. And she then went, and when they separated, she was out there scraping for money, doing anything, writing books. She would sell anything. They just seem to have money problems, don't they?
Yes, wasn't she also involved in that cash for access scandal or something, where she gave access to Prince Andrew for £500,000 or something?
And I bet now whoever paid $500,000 to have access to Andrew is busy trying to obliterate it from his history.
Probably.
I mean, I can see it. Anyway, I've got to keep rattling through these. What have we got here? The Times. Well, it's got a great picture on the front of the former Brazil captain Cafu drawing the teams from the World Cup finals yesterday. And he looks pleased as punch. He's holding up England. England have had a very favourable draw, which a few years ago we would have said would still not guarantee us getting through to the next round. But it's looking very good. But football, this is the one with the round ball, Albie.
Oh, is that what a football is? Yeah. So not the oval ball. Is that rugby?
No, I can tell you. I know you founded, Conservatives Against Racism, right? And you are a Conservative, but you are now playing to the stereotypical Conservative here.
And what's that stereotypical Conservative?
Well, someone who is not going to be that keen on football. I'm
just not big into sports personally.
Really?
I had bad experiences at school because I was obese as a child. So the whole sport thing, yeah, I know.
Wow.
I was huge.
You
are
a tribute how to deal with it then.
Well, actually, it's kind of a bit of a tragic story. So basically, I got sepsis when I was 15 or 16. Just lost all of the weight, never put it back on.
That is pretty horrific to get.
It
sepsis.
Was horrific.
Yeah.
But I'm not unhappy with now not being obese anymore.
I mean, the truth of the matter is, the truth of the matter is that with something like obesity, of course, it has huge high risks with type 2 diabetes, for example, costs something like 20 billion a year it costs us in related costs. And you can help manage it yourself by effective, healthy eating. And we've seen that. Tom Watson, a former MP, did extremely well on that. Daily Telegraph. I think you're coming to this one, aren't you? Thousands of turbines to treble onshore wind power. You don't need to do that now because I think we'll cover that later. But I want to highlight it is a big splash in the Daily Telegraph. And this is a classic issue because Boris wants us all to go renewables. And his idea, I think, is to put some form of wind power in the back of everyone's garden, from what I can tell here. OK, I exaggerate to make a point. And that won't go down well with lots of Conservatives. But interesting story on the bottom. Putin, the cancer doctor and the baths of antler blood. I think you've got to read this and to bear in mind that we might be doing a bit of our own propaganda here, because this is one of those stories which may have some truth in it or not. Apparently, whenever he goes on holiday, he's surrounded by thyroid cancer specialists to help him recover. He's allegedly having a bath in antler blood. OK, right. I'll leave you to make your mind up on that story. I can't really add very much to it. SUNAK in the Eye, this is on the Eye weekend. SUNAK urged to wake up to UK's cost of living crisis. And we'll be talking about this in more detail later on in the show. But basically, he's going to end up, I put money on this. If you can get down the bookies, this will ease your cost of living crisis. And I'm tongue-in-cheek here, right? This is not serious. You will make a few quid if you could get odds on, will Sunak come back with more measures before his autumn statement? The answer is yes. Boris Johnson will force him to do it. That might lead to a row, but he is going to come back with measures because essentially the backbenchers are revolting. Even the fiscally conservative ones are. And the Eye have got a very good story on that, talking about who and what, which is why I think it's got legs. The Daily Star usually have absolute rubbish headlines, but it's quite interesting here. 2 light bulbs, dim and dimmer. Mega rich energy boss tells customers to save cash by not using Lecky. I'd like to think he was well intentioned, but when you are a highly paid boss of an electricity company, do not patronise those you are screwing by charging loads more money. It really is not a good look. You and the P&O guy should get together, perhaps. Meanwhile, I'm afraid one of the Conservative ministers, who's apparently earning $115,000, which would be his MP pay plus his ministerial pay, is, according to the Star, moaning about the cost of living crisis is making his life tricky. Well, that is entirely possible, that someone's life could be tricky, depending whatever you are earning. And the reason I say that is because, you know, whatever you're earning, you've now got bigger bills. However, it is crass at the highest level to allow an interpretation even, or go close to saying that you are going to have impact from when you're on 115,000 from the cost of living. If you are a politician, that was not a good place to go. This is Kit Malthouse. He's a minister and the North West Hampshire MP. Very competent minister, I have to say. So quite what he's doing. And I think he was well intentioned, but one of those really careless comments that you come on, politicians should know better, shouldn't they?
I think it was a genuine comment from a minister, and we don't hear those very often. I think one of the most astonishing things about the cost of living crisis is that it is affecting people in all income brackets. Everyone's bills are going up, everyone's feeling the pinch, including our elected representatives. Yeah,
it's absolutely right. I mean, you can be on £50,000 a year, £100,000 a year, £200,000. You can have a big house, you'll get a bigger council tax bill. There are things in this cost of living crisis that are going to affect everyone. The difficulty is that many people, and we did this on this show a while ago, basically don't think the MPs have any chance of understanding what it's like for those right at the lower economic end of the scale, because they're on salaries 4 times out there. They are not facing the difficulties of choosing between heating and eating. That is why those statements are so toxic. And I think, in fairness, you're absolutely right. I think Kit was trying to make a very sensible statement there. You just got to be so careful. And I know that. I've made those mistakes myself. So coming up anyway, after the break, I'll be back with Albie and we'll pick up. Albie, He's with me for the press review today. Financial analyst, political commentator and co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism. Listen, just before you get to your story, Conservatives Against Racism, all right? That's a group that you founded. I'd like to think all Conservatives are against racism. So what's the kind of driving focus and point of the group?
Yes, I would like to think that all Conservatives are against racism as well, but the simple fact of the matter is, historically, that's not been the case. Now, Nick, you've been around longer than I am. You commented earlier about how young I was. You might remember what Enoch Powell said in his Rivers of Blood speech. And the problem with the Conservative Party is we've got this checkered history when it comes to race relations. We've not always been on the right side of the argument. Now, with the publication of the government's Inclusive Britain strategy, we are on the right side of the argument, and finally we're starting to make headway on this issue. But these perceptions that a lot of people from ethnic minorities, particularly of a certain generation, are still there. And my organisation is all about changing those perceptions and moving the party forward so that we can all contribute to this fantastic conservative movement in this country, which has brought this country so much prosperity and opportunity.
And have you also founded it because electorally the perception is amongst many groups, I think probably, certainly when I was seeking election, the highest anti-conservative group, if you like, who were just never considering voting Conservative, was Black Caribbeans, who came here in the 60s, 50s and 60s. And actually, I think it was about 8% would vote Conservative. Was it driven in part by trying to get the message out of what Conservatives stand for and, if you like, highlight this sort of perception that they are a racist party in places?
Precisely. It was also about helping ethnic minorities understand what conservative values are. And actually, when you speak to a lot of ethnic minorities about what they believe and about how their parents came to this country, how my grandparents got to this country, this aspiration, this opportunity, this feeling that they wanted to do something different with their lives and do better than generations before them, those are conservative values, Nick. So why are people that have that aspiration voting for the Labour Party when they don't believe in socialism? And I think it's this disconnect between the votes and the values of a lot of British ethnic minorities that we need to change, because there's a massive opportunity there for the Conservative Party to get people behind the party who historically, and it looks like it's because of the colour of their skin, aren't voting for us. And that's not a good reason. These are irrelevant characteristics, Nick.
It's also very complex in some ways, particularly when you look at it with an electoral eye. I still remember the very clumsy attempts by the Conservative Party where it kind of grouped ethnic minorities together.
BAME. I hate that aggregation.
And it was also, you would talk about, and I remember this, so I hope I'm not going to annoy anyone here, where they would talk about an Asian vote. You know, I mean, it was clumsy in many ways, the approach to it. And the old solution, wasn't it? If you put a person of colour up here, you'll win more votes. I mean, that was the sort of thinking that used to happen. What do you think is the driver here? What would you do differently to try and have more electoral success amongst different ethnic groups?
We've actually got to deliver on the promises that we promise in elections, on our manifestos, or in pledges that we make through the periods that we're in power. We can't be going back and changing our manifesto pledges. We've got to be absolutely delivering on this Inclusive Britain strategy, which came from the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities. We've actually got to deliver on that, integrate all of those 74 actions into the Level Up agenda and make progress before the next general election. It's not just ethnic minorities, by the way, who are feeling distrustful of the Conservatives at the moment. We've been behind in the polls since November last year. So we need to get better at delivering for the whole country, so that in the May elections and the general election, whenever that is, we win as many seats as we can.
OK, we could talk much more about that, but let's go to your first story, shall we? Because I think this is going to be a real problem for the Conservatives.
I agree, absolutely. So this is a story in The Telegraph. It is about how thousands of wind turbines are going to treble onshore wind power. Now, this is a project, this is something which is quite tricky for the Conservatives, I think, because on the one hand, you've got the Tory faithful who don't really like wind turbines because people think that they're ugly, they're destroying landscapes and so on and so forth. But equally, this same Tory faithful supports fracking. So it's interesting that in one hand, we've got Conservatives that support fracking, that some people argue...
That's because it's underground.
Well, it's not just underground. People have tremors. It's damaging to the environment. I think the two arguments are similar.
Okay.
But this point here about this story is that Boris Johnson might be about to basically lift this moratorium on onshore wind, which I think it was brought in at some point during the 2010s, because we want to provide 45 gigawatts extra energy from wind energy, which would mean 7,000 wind turbines would need to be built somewhere in Britain.
Do you know how many we've got at the moment?
I am not sure how many we've got at the moment. It's certainly a lot less than 7,000, and there's been a lot of, generally speaking, a lot of opposition to them.
But the only problem is, when the wind don't blow, they don't work. We had 1 month, didn't we, when the wind didn't blow and we didn't have any electricity. So what's he going to do when there's no wind?
But I don't think anyone's arguing that we should just have 100% wind energy. People are saying it should be part of a mixed energy policy to get us to energy independence. I think that includes renewables. I think that includes nuclear. I think that involves some fossil fuels as well, getting it from fracking or North Sea oil exploration. But ultimately, it also speaks to a problem in this country that people seem to be opposed to building anything anywhere. We see it with housing. We've got this housing crisis because we can't get planning to build houses in the right parts of the country. Yeah, so people in my generation can't afford housing.
You saw what happened in Amersham and the by-election in Amersham and Chesham. The Liberals made hay with that because basically the government did what you've just asked. Swept away planning laws, they said, and you can build as many houses as you like. And you thought, oh, they didn't like that. And can you blame them? I'm watching market town after market town, home counties after home counties that are becoming dormitories all the way up now and to beyond places like Peterborough and Huntingdon because so much of the economy is down here. We're really only going to sort this out when you actually level up and spread the wealth across the country and people want to live elsewhere.
Partially, but I think the issue with planning and housing is it gets politicised when really I think all the parties just need to agree that actually we need to build more houses in this country so people in my generation can enjoy the advantage of home ownership,
sure,
which generations before.
But I think all the politicians do agree. I think the politicians do agree.
So then why did the Liberal Democrats in Chesham and Amersham run on that?
Because they wanted to win an election.
Well, precisely, so they don't all agree, and this is the point. If we agree, if politicians agree that we need to build more houses and we don't politicise the issue, people accept that some landscapes will have to change so that your children and grandchildren can afford to buy houses in the environments and in the neighbourhoods that they grow up in. And the same problem happens with energy, because you get people who are opposed to wind power, wind turbines going up near their houses, nuclear power stations going up near their houses. And
You're missing one important point here.
Go on.
Quality of life. Now, I have lived in overdeveloped areas and I have seen basically how they have become attractions for dreadfully built, poor quality homes that attract ultimately higher levels of antisocial behaviour. They become no community in them at all. They're cheap and they're rubbish. And then you go and throw in a few wind turbines. Who would want to live there?
No one is saying, I'm certainly not advocating that we get rid of planning rules altogether. I'm not saying that we should be building poor quality housing. We've seen the effects of that across the country, not least in inner city London, where we see, a lot of crime, a lot of drug taking in a lot of these poorly designed areas. No one's advocating for more of that. We're advocating for
building
good
them
quality,
brand new,
good quality housing stock in the right parts of the country so that we can serve the demand
but
of
we're
housing.
Not. The problem is we're not, Albie. I mean, come to Bishop Stortford, get off the train now, and you will see they are building huge blocks that are going to become attractions, not very good places to live. They're going to become probably 1-2 bedroom apartments there in the main. They're going to have all the usual parking issues around them. They're going to probably end up having a huge proportion of investors who buy them for buy-to-let, because that's an easy fix when people come to housing. And you're going to find more and more problems developing in each of these areas that I've seen in my own constituency of Enfield, where they made this mistake 10, 15, 20 years ago and are still paying a huge price. They're not building nice quality places.
But Nick, do you not find it astonishing that in the country that invented the railway and kicked off the Industrial Revolution, We can barely build a new underground line without it overrunning in time. We can't build enough houses to sustain the demand in the population. We can't build enough power stations from a variety of different sources to get energy independence. We can't build anything. When did we get so bad at building things? We need to recapture our imagination, Nick. Of course, it's got to be done properly and done well. I think. Let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah,
we've got to recapture our imagination and start building things again.
Well, there's a view. So, what have you got for us coming up next now, Albie? What's your next story?
So this next story is from The Times, but it's being reported in many different news outlets this morning. It's about... Now, the headline in The Times, it sounds quite scary. It reads, UK missile shoots down first Russian helicopter. Now, this isn't being fired by British soldiers, so don't be worried about that, listeners. But actually, it is a Starstreak missile system.
That would be a declaration of war.
It would be a declaration of war. That has not happened, let me just confirm. But it's a Starstreak missile system, which is a British missile system that we sent across to Ukraine. I think it was about a week or two ago. I remember hearing about it in the news and thinking it sounded very exciting. And basically, they have used this Starstreak missile system to shoot down a Russian helicopter for the first time on the Ukrainian battlefield. And there's an extraordinary video, Nick, that I watched when I was out of the studio just to see what it was all about, and it is just the craziest video. It's like something you'd see in a kind of video game or an action movie. You almost forget that this is really happening and that there are people in that helicopter, and obviously every death is a tragedy. But I think what this shows is really how powerful the British aid to Ukraine has been. We were one of the first country, I think, to send over military aid, and now that military aid is having an impact on the battlefield and contributing to this success, arguably, that the Ukrainians are seeing over the Russians.
It's interesting because I do get accused of being called a wicked old Tory, but I'm very quick to criticise the government on any programme I'm on when I think they're making mistakes, and I have done. But on Ukraine, I actually do think they have led, and very few opposition politicians will give credit to the government for that. And the military equipment has been amazing. What do you make of the argument we shouldn't send offensive weapons and only defensive weapons to Ukraine, because offensive weapons is a step too far? I think it's tosh, because quite frankly, when a missile's coming at you, you know, you're not sitting there distinguishing between, oh, this has been issued in defence of Ukraine, or this one is on the attack. They've been invaded. All weapons count, don't they?
I mean, it sounds like some sort of wordplay to me. I'm not really sure what the difference between an offensive weapon is and a defensive weapon is. If at the end of the day it kills someone, it's going to offend someone, isn't it?
Exactly. Someone said it to me, well, a plane is a good example. And I said, well, hang on, a plane will shoot someone out of the sky who's trying to bomb you. That's offensive. I mean,
or offensive in some people's eyes. It's just silly wordplay, really, I think.
But it's that argument that on Ukraine, I think, I hope has been parked, because the fact of the matter is, we are involved in this war. It's by proxy, effectively. You know, it's not our war, but we have to stand up to the bully, the dictator, the one who started this invasion. It's simple as that. And if that, and I think, you know, to be fair, NATO, I think, have been quite clever, because they are right not to have got involved. And there was a lot of, if you remember, it was 2-3 weeks ago, the pressure was on for us to put troops on the ground. And then I think we'd be looking at a totally different scenario. NATO were right, weren't they?
I think NATO were absolutely right. Had NATO got involved in this war, which is an awful war, it would have been an even worse war. We'd be looking at war across the entire continent of Europe, not just in Ukraine. We'd potentially be looking at nuclear warfare. The US getting involved, it would have been terrible. NATO have played this really well, but not from the very beginning, Nick. I think one of the reasons that Putin decided to invade Ukraine is because he felt that there was NATO disunity, and actually that's been shown not to be true, because we've got back together, and the Prime Minister, to his credit, has really, I think, played a leading role in uniting the West against Putin's Russia.
Does this mean Boris Johnson's Prime Minister until the next election, do you think?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think he knows the answer to that question. We will have to see, of course, what comes out of this Partygate issue, which is still going on. We've had the first fines, I think, issued today
I don't
yesterday.
think he's going to get a fine. I just don't see that happening. I don't think the police are going to want to effectively do that. I just don't see it happening. You know, there'll be all sorts of ways out of it, which is Which is why when I was on air last week, I was asking people, does Partygate matter? And an awful lot of people said, no, it doesn't matter now. But I think they also held that view, from what I could tell, before Ukraine. And it's not necessarily because of Ukraine. I think the issue is actually, and I say this with all due respect, this isn't about the people. This is about the MPs now. It's those MPs are going to be making a judgment when the final Sue Gray report comes out. That's the report that will come out when all the police notices have been done, that will probably criticise the leadership in Number 10 very heavily. They will decide, is he an election winner or not? I think that's where it's going to be. MPs like to look after their seats, basically, don't they?
They like to look after their seats, but also the interests of their constituents. And I think what will be interesting to see is how well we Conservatives do in the May elections, to see whether or not any of this Partygate issue has had an impact on our electoral success. Now, I guess the party could say, well, we're sort of mid-term, we'd expect to lose this number of councillors, fine. But really, what will turn the tide in the Conservative Party against Boris Johnson is if he's seen not to be an electoral asset, because, to be honest, that is his biggest asset to the party and the biggest asset to himself.
It's his only asset in so many respects. People will make a judgment about his political ideology. People will ask the question, what does Boris Johnson stand for? The kindest answer would be pragmatic politics, but you ask someone if he's a conservative, is he a fiscal conservative? Well, I don't think so. Would you say he is?
I think actions speak louder than words, and I think the actions that he's taken since the 2019 general election, some might argue on the right of the party that they're not fiscally conservative, but more fiscally conservative than the Labour Party.
And you have a fiscally conservative chancellor. Are the two going to fall out? History shows when chancellors and prime ministers fall out, it doesn't end well.
I think they probably have at some points fallen out. I think that's probably, we've seen that in the response in the spring statement. I think the Prime Minister probably wanted the Chancellor to go much further, but Rishi Sunak, fiscal hawk, understanding that we're paying £83 billion in servicing our debt this year, doesn't want to borrow any more, which is important.
That's the tension I spoke about earlier. That's going to come back. Boris Johnson is going to want to spend more money, because how many stories can you have every day in the papers, which is what's going to happen now, of people on the breadline, the horror stories. They're going to be in the papers every day. Johnson won't cope with that, I suspect. Let's talk partners, right? Rishi Sunak's wife got really targeted because she has, I think it's less than 1% shareholding in a big company, Infosys, which was founded by her father, and they had offices in Russia. I think they employed up to 80 people. Until yesterday, they still had that office open. The charge was hypocrisy. You're putting sanctions in place on anyone basically from Russia, doing business with Russia, and yet your Chancellor's wife is sitting there with money. Was that a legitimate charge? Should we be going after political partners?
No, I don't think we should be going after political partners, but I think the reason why this particular story gained so much traction is because of the amount of money that was attached to those shares. I think that tiny share is worth something like £400 million, which to a lot of people in the middle of a cost of living crisis is a lot of money to, to most people,
actually, yes.
So maybe apart from Rishi Sunak's father-in-law, who is actually worth £3.5 billion. But the point is whenever there are these huge sums of money, I think, attached to politicians or seemingly attached to politicians, the public don't like it. We had the second jobs crisis, and of course, who were the people that were the most targeted there? The people earning the most money. So Sir Geoffrey Cox, for example, earning 700, 800k on top of his MP salary. That's a slightly separate issue, but the point is it's a sum of money. Now, on the issue about wives or husbands being targeted by the media or by the public, I think that's unfair. We saw it with Samantha Cameron, we saw it with Cherie Blair, we saw it with Melania Trump, and I think it's unfair.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned Cherie Blair. Let me give you what I would regard as a hypocrisy case, why people would have thought a legitimate target should have been her. Under Tony Blair, the dreaded Human Rights Act was put into English law that's led to everyone claiming for their human rights being affronted if they tripped over a pavement, basically, right? She was a human rights lawyer and essentially would have benefited from that decision. Everyone went, that's outrageous, and therefore attacked Cherie Blair. I would still go that actually wives are not fair game. Or partners are not fair game. If someone had gone after my wife during any of my politics, I would have been tempted, and it would have been wrong, and I wouldn't have probably done it. I would have been tempted to do a Will Smith, right? Because, you know, she didn't stand for Parliament and can't defend herself, doesn't have the platform, and yet people think it's a legitimate attack.
I mean, again, I don't think it is a legitimate attack. A legitimate attack to attack the partners of politicians or just public figures in general. These aren't people who have decided to put themselves in the public eye. These are people who are married to people who just so happen to be in the public eye. And, you know, I think it must be extremely off-putting, I think, as well, to anyone that maybe wants to become an MP in the future that has to think, I've got to put my family through what all of these other families have been through.
Well, and then, this is where I could put a counter-argument to you, and I suspect others would. It wouldn't surprise me if someone called in on this. Carrie Symonds. Now, Carrie was a campaigner. She still is. A very big environmental campaigner. She was accused of driving Boris Johnson to the green agenda. She was accused of putting her people in place. And if you think about it, people like Henry Newman, who were close friends, the so-called Carrie Symonds set. So she became a target for attack. Does my theory that partners should not be attacked because they can't answer for themselves hold up with those examples from Carrie Symonds?
I think the case with Carrie Symonds is different. Carrie's been a big figure in the Conservative Party for a long time. She was the keynote speaker at an LGBT Conservative event at Conservative Party conference that I went to. She's a political figure in her own right. So I think it's very different, for example, to someone like Samantha Cameron, who was nothing to do with politics really before David Cameron became Prime Minister. Carrie Symonds has been a big figure, a respected figure, by the way, in the Conservative Party for a long time. She represents, I think, the point of view of a lot of Conservative activists who are maybe on the more socially liberal wing of the party. And it's important in the Conservative Party, we're a broad church, that all wings come together to win elections, because we are a broad church and that's how we win elections.
Now, you see, to my mind, the argument, I remember it raging about Carrie Symonds, and people were saying Boris Johnson shouldn't be listening to his wife. And my defence at the time was, you know, why wouldn't you listen to your partner, whoever you were? You'd be foolish not to listen to your partner. But at the end of the day, he is the one who makes the decisions. He's the Prime Minister. So he should be held to account for them, not Carrie Symonds. So if a Green policy that she had said, listen, Boris, mate, OK, I'm withholding all privileges until you bring this policy in, that's up to him. He's got to make the decision. He has to decide and act. It's not really her, because he has other advisors and they're all going to advise him. He decides. And that's where I kind of drew the line. And that was my argument why Carrie Symonds, whatever you think of her views, should not be the target of attack.
Yes, I completely agree with that, Nick. I don't think you can blame any person in power for listening to the person that they love. Isn't that what you're supposed to do in a marriage? Confide in each other. You know, it's a partnership. Now, obviously, Boris Johnson can't be seen as a kind of proxy Prime Minister where Carrie Symonds is running the country through Boris Johnson, but I don't think that's happening. Boris Johnson actually has been very consistent on his green views. He's always spoken about it, and it's not just Carrie Symonds that speaks about green issues. We've got peers like Lord Goldsmith, for example, who Boris Johnson is very close to, who has very similar views. You know, we've been talking about green policies in the Conservative Party since Cameron was in power in 2010.
Hug a hoodie.
Precisely.
But they haven't served the Conservative Party well. The bottom line is, I don't think they have. And I don't think I'd love to see evidence that actually the green agenda that Boris has embraced more enthusiastically than any Conservative leader that I can think of is actually how much that served to win him the election in 2019. It didn't. It was all about Brexit. And I'm actually wondering now that he's facing this cost of living crisis, is he losing his nerve? He wants to, you know, if he was Green, he'd be building these wind turbines now. He'd be going for that. If he was going Green, wouldn't he by now have commissioned, for example, his nuclear power stations that he wants up and down the land? If he was going Green, would he seriously be considering fracking? If he was going Green, would he seriously be allowing us to open the oil wells and gas wells again? I think he's going to be found more wanting, and I welcome it, by the way.
I think he's going to be seen to be found as being more pragmatic. We need to get to a state of energy independence in Britain. I think, as I said before, some of that comes from renewables, some of it comes from nuclear, some of it comes from fossil fuels. And we've got to take the practical steps now to get ourselves in a good position where we're not going to be relying on anyone else for our energy supply, because we have a geographic advantage in the UK of being able to do that. We just have to grasp that and do it.
We shall see how it develops. So listen, Lawrence, thank you for your call. Very passionate. I mean, look, you might not like the message there, Albie, but basically I get a lot of calls like that.
It is a very difficult time for a lot of people up and down the country, and these feelings that people have that the government isn't doing enough or hasn't understood how acute the cost of living crisis is going to be on people are well founded and understood. And I do think that probably we will see the Chancellor come back before the autumn statement with some additional measures.
I'd put money on it if I was a betting person. Anyway, your last story.
Yes, final story, back on climate, but from a different angle. So this is a story from the Daily Mail, and it is about a group of anti-oil protesters. I think they're Extinction Rebellion again.
Are they Extinction Rebellion or are they oil protesters? There's I haven't actually read this story.
I think they are. I've written down XR here, so I'm 100% sure it's Extinction
I'm getting ready with the mute button. just because I
or is it Insulate Britain? Who knows? They all merge into one. Let's say anti-oil protesters. Anyway, they're blockading oil terminals across England, and they're saying that there's no way other than civil resistance to get the government to listen.
This is Just Stop Oil. This is Just Stop Oil, one of the most ludicrous groups to emerge just when we need oil.
Precisely. And also, your argument about green policies and the green agenda is that the government's been listening too much. So I'm not really sure what these people want the government to do. I think the government is listening to the demands of green activists, absolutely, and has been doing so for a while.
What do they actually want? Are they seriously saying, we just want to stop oil? Is that it? Is like grind the whole world to a stop? Is that the objectives of these people in this article?
The objectives of these people is exactly, it's to stop oil, but there's no... People come up with these ideas and they say, let's just stop something. But they don't offer, a little bit like the caller earlier, a practical path to actually get to that end goal, that end state, which is realistic within a time frame, and that is something which is politically viable.
It does beg the question, why can't they just go and get a job? I mean, honestly, I wonder where they get the time and where do they dream up such a ludicrous concept. Look, in a way, not in a way, I love free speech and I like the right for people to make their voice heard. And if you want to get rid of oil, that is absolutely fine. But you need a coherent plan. Just to turn around and say, well, we'll live off renewables, ignoring how much of probably everything from the clothes they are wearing through to what they consume, how they get about, how we get the goods in the shops that they're so worried about getting their hands on, has this integral kind of reliance on oil. And I'm sort of bemused by what is the frank stupidity of it. And then there's a little part of me that kind of likes the idea that when people used to say, and young people particularly, and I include you in that, even though I'm not talking about, 18-year-olds, you're a mature young Albie, are not engaged in politics. They are, just not politics as we know it. There's lots of people out there campaigning for all sorts of other things. And that, in a way, is a good thing. I don't have a problem with that. But I just find it laughable that some of the causes don't, if you like, survive the initial test, the early scratching, just as we heard with War on One. We want to help poverty, but we want to keep green taxes in place. Wrong. Totally wrong. Albie, thank you. It's been fantastic having you here. What are you doing for the rest of the day?
What am I doing for the rest of the day? I'm going to be meeting some friends later on for a barbecue, actually, just down the road from here.
And what fuel are you using in your barbecue, can I ask?
I imagine it will be gas.
Yeah,
yes.
There you go.
We've not quite upgraded to a heat pump yet. No heat pump barbecues
on the
market.
Can I give you a warning, by the way? Don't do what I did yesterday, which is I went out and bought one of these little meters that you can plug in to check how much electricity is consumed.
Why would anyone do that?
Well, I'm doing it because I'm trying to explain that actually, if you want to save money, you know, think about what you are fueling on your electricity, right? Don't start worrying about a windmill in the back of your garden. That's not going to solve your problem. What are you wasting electricity on? And now, kind of, my wife's embraced this to a new level. Like, did you know how much that cup of tea has cost from the kettle? No, and I don't want to know. I was kind of a broad brushstrokes. Sorry, what else are you doing at this this barbecue?
So
what else you got
barbecue this afternoon. I think that'll be kind of early afternoon time, and then my partner's got back from his holiday yesterday.
Well, I
so
hope
going
you
out
flew
for dinner later on.
You went in a plane?
Well,
no?
I'm not really sure how else you get back from San Francisco, to be honest.
Right, good.
It's not Greta Thunberg, so he's not sailed. He'd still be somewhere in the mid-Atlantic, I would imagine now.
Yeah, but, well, I thought they all landed early, these flights, when they come in there, you know. Anyway, I'm all for it. And do you know what? If you're getting on a plane, by all means, think about what it's doing, but enjoy your flight, enjoy your holiday, whoever you are, wherever you're going. Albie, thanks so much for joining us.
Nick.
Albie Amankona, financial analyst, political commentator and co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism.